The morning fog hung thick over Bramblewood Palace as Captain Marcus Sterling made his final rounds through the royal gardens. His polished black boots clicked against the wet cobblestones, while his sharp eyes scanned every shadow and corner. After 20 years of faithful service, these early morning patrols had become second nature to him. But today felt different. Today marked exactly 3 months since Queen Victoria's passing, and the palace still carried the heavy weight of grief. Marcus paused beside the rose garden where a small, golden figure sat perfectly still beneath the marble bench. Winston, Queen Victoria's beloved Corgi, had been waiting there every morning since his mistress died. The little dog's routine never changed. He would sit in the exact spot where the late queen used to feed him treats while reviewing her morning correspondence. "Good morning, old boy," Marcus whispered, crouching down to scratch behind Winston's ears. The corgi's tail wagged weakly, but his dark eyes remained fixed on the palace doors, still hoping for his beloved queen to emerge. Marcus had grown attached to Winston during these months of mourning. When the royal household staff became too busy with the transition preparations, Marcus had quietly taken responsibility for the dog's care. He brought food twice daily, made sure Winston had fresh water, and even fashioned a small shelter near the garden entrance for rainy nights. Nobody had officially asked him to do this. It just felt right. The sound of approaching footsteps made Marcus straighten up quickly. Lady Catherine Whitmore, the new Queen's chief of staff, appeared around the corner with her usual stern expression and clipboard in hand. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her dark blue dress seemed to absorb what little sunlight managed to break through the clouds. "Captain Sterling," she said in her crisp, businesslike tone, "Queen Isabel requires your presence in the throne room immediately." Marcus glanced down at Winston, who had retreated slightly behind the bench at the sight of Lady Catherine. The dog had good instincts. Lady Catherine had made it clear from day one that she considered pets in the royal quarters to be unsanitary and unprofessional. "Of course, Lady Catherine. May I ask what this concerns?" "Palace security arrangements," she replied curtly. "There are several changes Her Majesty wishes to implement immediately." As they walked through the ornate hallways toward the throne room, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. The palace walls, decorated with centuries of royal portraits, seemed to watch him with knowing expressions. Queen Victoria's official portrait hung prominently near the throne room entrance, showing her kind smile and gentle eyes. Winston appeared in the corner of that painting, sitting loyally at her feet. The throne room doors opened with their familiar heavy groan. Queen Isabel sat regally upon the golden throne, her dark hair crowned with a simple but elegant tiara. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. But her beauty carried a coldness that Queen Victoria had never possessed. Where Queen Victoria had worn warmth like a comfortable shawl, Queen Isabel wore authority like armor. "Captain Sterling," Queen Isabel's voice echoed through the vast chamber. "Thank you for coming so promptly." Marcus bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I am at your service." "I have been reviewing the palace operations since my coronation," she began, her fingers drumming against the throne's armrest. "There are several inefficiencies that require immediate attention." Lady Catherine stepped forward, consulting her clipboard. "Her Majesty has concerns about the current state of palace grounds maintenance and security protocols." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He had a sinking suspicion he knew where this conversation was headed. "Specifically," Queen Isabel continued, "I understand there is a dog that has been wandering the gardens unsupervised for months. This presents both a security risk and a sanitation concern." "Your Majesty," Marcus began carefully, "Winston has been grieving for Queen Victoria. He poses no security threat, and I have been ensuring he is properly cared for." Queen Isabel's expression hardened slightly. Captain Sterling, while I appreciate Queen Victoria's sentimental attachments, I must consider the dignity and efficiency of this palace. A grieving dog wandering the royal gardens sends the wrong message about our ability to maintain order. Marcus felt heat rising in his chest, but he maintained his professional composure. With respect, Your Majesty, Winston was Queen Victoria's constant companion for 8 years. He is part of the palace's history. History, Queen Isabel repeated, standing from her throne. Yes, Captain, you are quite right. Winston represents history. But I am the present, and I must focus on the future of this monarchy. Lady Catherine cleared her throat. Her Majesty has made arrangements with the Riverside Animal Sanctuary. They have agreed to take Winston immediately. He will be well cared for, and he will be able to run freely in their countryside facility. Marcus felt as if someone had struck him in the chest. You want to send Winston away? I want to solve a problem efficiently, Queen Isabel replied. The sanctuary is only 30 miles from here. If you wish to visit the animal occasionally, arrangements can be made. But, Your Majesty, Marcus said, struggling to keep his voice steady. Winston isn't just any animal. He was Queen Victoria's most treasured companion. She specifically mentioned in her will that he should remain at the palace for the rest of his natural life. Queen Isabel's eyes flashed with irritation. Captain Sterling, I am well aware of what Queen Victoria's will contained. However, as the reigning monarch, I have the authority to make decisions I believe are in the best interest of the crown. Marcus looked around the throne room, taking in the grandeur that Queen Victoria had so loved. She had often said that the palace was not just a building, but a living symbol of continuity and tradition. Winston had been part of that tradition. When would this transfer take place? He asked quietly. This afternoon, Lady Catherine answered. The sanctuary's vehicle will arrive at 2 o'clock sharp. Marcus felt the world spinning slightly. This afternoon. In just a few hours, Winston would be loaded into a stranger's vehicle and driven away from the only home he had ever known. Away from the garden, where he still waited every morning for his beloved queen. I understand, Your Majesty, Marcus said, though every word felt like swallowing glass. Excellent, Queen Isabel smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I knew I could count on your professionalism, Captain Sterling. That will be all. Marcus bowed again and turned to leave. As he walked back through the hallways, his mind raced with conflicting emotions. His duty was to serve the crown without question. He had sworn an oath of loyalty and obedience 20 years ago, and that oath had never been tested like this. But as he stepped back into the garden and saw Winston still sitting hopefully beneath Queen Victoria's favorite bench, Marcus realized that his oath might mean something different than he had always believed. Perhaps true loyalty to the crown meant protecting not just the current monarch, but everything the crown represented, including the memory and wishes of those who had served it faithfully before. Winston looked up at him with trusting brown eyes, and Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Marcus spent the next hour walking the palace grounds, his mind churning with thoughts he had never allowed himself to think before. In 20 years of service, he had never questioned a direct order from the monarchy. He had been trained from his first day to follow commands without hesitation, to put the crown's wishes above his own feelings. But this felt wrong in a way that made his chest ache. He found himself in Queen Victoria's private study, a room that had been left untouched since her passing. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through tall windows. Her mahogany desk still held neat stacks of correspondence, and her favorite fountain pen lay where she had placed it 3 months ago. The room smelled faintly of lavender and old books, exactly as it always had. Marcus walked to the window that overlooked the rose garden. Below, Winston remained at his post, though the little Corgi had begun to pace slightly, as if sensing that something was different about this day. Marcus had noticed that Winston often became restless when strangers approached the palace. The dog had developed strong protective instincts during his years with Queen Victoria. A soft knock at the door made Marcus turn around. Sarah Mitchell, one of the senior housekeepers, stood in the doorway with tears in her eyes. She had worked at the palace for 15 years and had been particularly close to Queen Victoria. "Captain Sterling," she said in a trembling voice. "I heard about Winston. Is it true? Are they really sending him away today?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Lady Catherine made the arrangements. A vehicle from Riverside Animal Sanctuary is coming at 2 o'clock. Sarah stepped into the room, wringing her hands. "But this was his home. Queen Victoria specifically said she wanted him to stay here always. She made me promise to look after him if anything happened to her." "I know," Marcus replied. "I was there when she made that request to several of us." Sarah walked to a small bookshelf and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "Captain, I need to show you something. Queen Victoria asked me to keep this safe after her diagnosis. She wrote in it every day during her final weeks." She opened the journal to a page marked with a blue ribbon. "Listen to this entry from just 2 weeks before she passed. My greatest fear is not death itself, but leaving Winston alone and confused. He has been my constant companion through the loneliest moments of my reign. Marcus Sterling has shown such kindness to both of us. I pray he will continue to watch over Winston when I am gone." The palace without Winston would be like a library without books, technically functional but missing its soul. Marcus felt his throat tighten as Sarah continued reading. She wrote about how Winston helped her through the dark period after King Edward died. How the little dog seemed to sense when she was sad and would rest his head on her lap until she felt better. She called him her furry counselor, because she often talked through difficult decisions while petting him. Sarah closed the journal and looked directly at Marcus. She trusted us to protect him, all of us who loved her. Marcus stared out the window again. Winston had stopped pacing and was now lying down with his head on his paws, still facing the palace doors. The sight made Marcus's decision crystallize in his mind with sudden clarity. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what time does Queen Isabel usually take her afternoon tea?" 3:30, in the blue parlor." "Why?" Marcus checked his pocket watch. It was already 1:15. The sanctuary vehicle would arrive in 45 minutes, and Queen Isabel would be expecting Winston to be handed over without any complications. "I need to speak with her before that vehicle arrives," Marcus said. "I need to make her understand what Winston meant to Queen Victoria and what he means to all of us who served her." Sarah's eyes widened. "Captain, you're talking about directly challenging Queen Isabel's orders. That could be considered insubordination. You could lose your position, or worse." Marcus turned from the window to face her. "Sarah, in 20 years of service, I have protected this palace from external threats. But what if the greatest threat to everything Queen Victoria stood for is coming from within these walls?" Before Sarah could respond, they heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. Through the open door, they saw 2 palace guards escorting a man in a brown uniform toward the main entrance. He carried a metal leash and a large pet carrier. "The sanctuary worker is early," Sarah whispered. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. He had perhaps 20 minutes to act before Winston would be taken away forever. 20 minutes to decide whether his loyalty belonged to the crown as an institution or to the people and principles that made the crown worth serving. He left Queen Victoria's study and walked quickly through the palace corridors, his mind racing through possible approaches to Queen Isabel. He could present a logical argument about public relations. Surely the people would be upset to learn that Queen Victoria's beloved companion had been banished from the palace. He could emphasize the security benefits of having a dog on the grounds. He could appeal to tradition and continuity. But as he approached the blue parlor, Marcus realized that none of those approaches would work. Queen Isabel had already considered and dismissed all practical arguments. She had made her decision based on her vision of what the monarchy should be, and she was not a woman who changed her mind easily. The blue parlor doors were closed, but Marcus could hear quiet conversation inside. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Once he walked through those doors and challenged the Queen's decision, there would be no going back. He would be crossing a line that could end his career and disgrace his family name. But then he thought about Queen Victoria's final weeks, when Winston had rarely left her bedside. He remembered how the little Corgi had seemed to understand that his mistress was failing, and how he had provided comfort simply by being present. He thought about all the mornings since her death when Winston had maintained his vigil in the garden, faithful and hopeful despite his confusion and grief. Marcus straightened his shoulders, adjusted his uniform, and knocked firmly on the parlor door. "Enter," came Queen Isabel's voice from within. Marcus opened the door to find Queen Isabel taking tea with Lady Catherine and 2 other members of her advisory council. The room fell silent as he entered, and Marcus sensed immediately that his arrival was unwelcome. "Captain Sterling," Queen Isabel said with raised eyebrows, "I was not expecting to see you again today. Is there some urgent security matter?" Marcus bowed respectfully, but when he straightened, his eyes met hers directly. "Your Majesty, I request permission to speak freely about the matter of Winston." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Lady Catherine set down her teacup with a sharp clink, and the other advisors exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Captain," Queen Isabel said slowly, "we have already discussed this matter thoroughly. The arrangements have been made." "Yes, Your Majesty, but I believe there are considerations that have not been fully examined." Queen Isabel leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming dangerously calm. "Captain Sterling, you are beginning to try my patience. What considerations could possibly override my decision as queen?" Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment of no return. Everything he said next would determine not only Winston's fate, but his own future as well. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, "I believe the consideration of honor." The word honor hung in the air like a bell that had been struck. Queen Isabel's advisors looked at each other nervously, while Lady Catherine's face flushed with barely contained anger. Marcus could feel his career hanging by a thread, but Queen Victoria's journal entry echoed in his mind. The palace without Winston would be like a library without books, technically functional but missing its soul. "Honor?" Queen Isabel repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Captain Sterling, are you suggesting that my decision lacks honor?" Marcus kept his posture straight and his voice respectful but firm. "Your Majesty, I am suggesting that sometimes our greatest honor comes not from making new decisions, but from honoring the promises of those who came before us." Lady Catherine started to speak, but Queen Isabel raised a hand to silence her. "Continue, Captain." "Queen Victoria made a solemn promise to Winston," Marcus said, his confidence growing with each word. "Not in her formal will, but in the way she lived every day for 8 years. She promised him a home, safety, and love for as long as he lived. When we break promises made by those who served the crown faithfully, we damage the crown itself." One of the advisors, Lord Harrison, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Captain, surely you understand that practical considerations must sometimes override sentimental ones." Marcus turned to face Lord Harrison directly. "My lord, with respect, there was nothing sentimental about Queen Victoria's relationship with Winston. That dog served this monarchy as faithfully as any guard or advisor. He provided comfort during state crises, companionship during lonely state dinners, and unwavering loyalty during the most difficult period of Queen Victoria's reign after King Edward's death. Queen Isabel leaned forward, studying Marcus intently. "You speak as if the dog was a member of my staff." "In many ways, Your Majesty, he was. Winston attended more state meetings than most cabinet members. He was present during phone calls with foreign leaders, during the review of legislation, during the planning of state events. He knew state secrets simply by virtue of being Queen Victoria's constant companion. If loyalty and service are the measures of belonging to this palace, then Winston has earned his place here 10 times over." The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, but he pressed on. "Your Majesty, I have served this crown for 20 years. I have never questioned an order, never failed in my duty, never put my personal feelings above my professional obligations. But today I stand before you not just as your guard, but as a witness to Queen Victoria's final wishes and as someone who understands what the crown truly represents." Queen Isabel stood up from her chair, and Marcus instinctively straightened further. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room pay attention. "Tell me, Captain Sterling, what do you believe the crown represents?" Marcus looked around the room, taking in the portraits of previous monarchs, the symbols of centuries of royal tradition, the very air that seemed heavy with history and responsibility. "The crown represents continuity, Your Majesty. It represents the promise that some things remain constant even as the world changes around them." Queen Victoria understood this. She knew that the monarchy's strength comes not from its power to change everything, but from its commitment to preserve what is worthy of preservation. Queen Isabel began pacing slowly around the room. "And you believe that honoring promises made to animals is part of this continuity?" "I believe that honoring all promises made in good faith is part of this continuity," Marcus replied. Queen Victoria's compassion for Winston was witnessed by hundreds of people over 8 years. Palace staff, visiting dignitaries, members of parliament. They all saw how she treated him as family. If we break that commitment now, what message does it send about how the crown treats those who serve it faithfully? Lady Catherine finally spoke, her voice sharp with frustration. "Captain Sterling, you are being dramatically emotional about a dog. This is about maintaining proper standards and moving forward efficiently." Marcus turned to face her directly. "Lady Catherine, I am being practical about the foundation of trust that supports this monarchy. Every person who serves the crown, from the highest advisor to the kitchen staff, needs to believe that their loyalty and dedication will be honored and remembered. When we cast aside those who served Queen Victoria faithfully, we tell everyone who serves now that their own faithful service might someday be equally disposable." Queen Isabel stopped pacing and looked out the window toward the garden where Winston waited. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she asked, "Captain, if I were to reverse my decision, what would you propose? The dog cannot simply wander the palace indefinitely." Marcus felt a surge of hope, but kept his expression controlled. "Your Majesty, Winston has never wandered aimlessly. He has maintained a routine based on his life with Queen Victoria. He waits in the garden each morning at the spot where she used to read her correspondence. He takes his afternoon rest in the corridor outside her former study. He sleeps in the small alcove near the kitchen where Queen Victoria always insisted he have his bed. And his care? I would be honored to continue caring for him, Your Majesty, as I have these past 3 months. It would require no additional resources from the palace budget and no disruption to daily operations." Queen Isabel walked to her chair but did not sit down. She looked at each person in the room, then back at Marcus. "Captain Sterling, in 20 years of service, have you ever made a request for personal accommodation?" "No, Your Majesty." "Have you ever asked for special treatment or privileges?" "No, Your Majesty." Have you ever failed in your duties or shown disloyalty to the crown? I hope not, Your Majesty. Queen Isabel nodded slowly. Lady Catherine, please send word to the animal sanctuary that their services will not be required today. Lady Catherine's mouth opened in surprise. Your Majesty, I thought we had agreed. We had agreed, Queen Isabel interrupted. But Captain Sterling has reminded me of something important. The strength of the crown lies not just in its authority, but in its honor. If we cannot keep faith with those who have served loyally, how can we expect anyone to serve loyally in the future? Marcus felt relief wash over him like cool water. Thank you, Your Majesty. Do not thank me yet, Captain. I have conditions. Queen Isabel's expression grew serious again. Winston may remain at the palace, but he will be your full responsibility. If there are any problems, any disruptions, any complaints from staff or visitors, any security issues, this arrangement ends immediately. I understand completely, Your Majesty. Furthermore, Queen Isabel continued, I want a small memorial plaque placed in the garden where Winston waits each morning. Something simple but dignified, acknowledging Queen Victoria's love for him and his faithful service to the crown. Marcus felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Your Majesty, that would be perfect. Queen Isabel smiled for the first time since Marcus had entered the room, and this smile reached her eyes. Captain Sterling, you have reminded me today that sometimes the most important part of ruling is knowing when not to rule. Thank you for your courage in speaking up. As Marcus left the blue parlor, he felt as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He walked quickly through the palace corridors and out into the garden, where Winston still waited patiently beneath the marble bench. Well, old friend, Marcus said, kneeling down to scratch the Corgi's ears. It looks like you're staying home after all. Winston's tail wagged enthusiastically, and for the first time since Queen Victoria's death, the little dog seemed truly alert and happy. As if he understood that he was safe, that his vigil had been honored, and that his home would remain his home. That evening, as Marcus made his final security rounds, he found Queen Isabel standing in the garden near where Winston was sleeping peacefully in his small shelter. She looked up as Marcus approached. Captain, she said quietly, I want you to know that today was difficult for me. Not because you challenged my decision, but because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. What was that, Your Majesty? Queen Isabel looked down at Winston, who was dreaming peacefully with his paws twitching slightly. Queen Victoria once told me that the crown's greatest power is not its authority over people, but its ability to inspire people to be better than they thought they could be. Today, you showed me what that inspiration looks like. Marcus bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, Queen Victoria would be very proud of your decision today. Queen Isabel smiled and turned to walk back toward the palace. Good night, Captain Sterling. Take good care of our friend. As she disappeared into the palace, Marcus looked down at Winston, who had opened his eyes and was looking up at him with obvious trust and affection. You know what, Winston? Marcus said softly. I think everything is going to be just fine. The little Corgi wagged his tail once, closed his eyes, and settled back into peaceful sleep under the stars, safe in the only home he had ever known.